The shadow in the corner, which Lucas thought was a coat rack, suddenly took a step forward and exhaled heavily. Lucas froze, his fingers digging into the upholstery of the beige sofa. His breath caught in a painful hitch in his throat. He stared wide-eyed at the dark corner of the living room, waiting for the shape to move again, waiting for the monster to reveal itself. 1 second passed, then 5, then 10. A jagged fork of lightning tore through the sky outside, illuminating the living room in a stark, bluish-white flash. The shape in the corner remained perfectly still. It was just a silhouette, a tall wooden pole draped with heavy, rain-soaked trench coats and old hats. It was the antique rack his father had dragged down from the attic earlier that morning to sort through donations. Lucas let out a shaky, self-deprecating laugh, the sound sounding thin and pathetic in the large, empty house. "Get a grip, man," he whispered to himself. It was the storm playing tricks on him. The wind was howling against the siding, making the old Victorian house groan and shift. The step forward was just a shifting shadow cast by the swaying trees outside. The heavy exhale was just a draft squeezing through the window seals. He was 22 years old, house-sitting for his parents while they visited wine country. Yet here he was, paralyzed by a pile of old clothes. He looked toward the staircase that led to the safety of his childhood bedroom on the second floor. To get there, he would have to walk right past that corner, past the looming, dark shape of the coat rack. The alternative was the living room. The big, comfortable couch, the massive flat-screen TV, and the illusion of company provided by a late-night movie. Lucas rubbed his face, feeling the cold sweat on his forehead. He made his choice. He was not going to sprint up the stairs like a frightened child. He grabbed the remote control, asserting his dominance over the environment, and settled deeper into the cushions. He told himself he was being rational, but deep down he knew the truth. He was too terrified to walk past that corner. He turned on the TV, letting the artificial light flood the room, pushing the shadows back, but not quite far enough. The movie was a loud, mindless action flick, exactly what Lucas needed to drown out the storm. But even with explosions rattling the speakers, he could not get comfortable. The air in the living room felt wrong. It was heavy, stagnant, and unusually cold. Every few minutes, Lucas found his eyes drifting from the screen to the periphery of his vision, checking the corner. The coat rack stood there, a silent sentinel. It looked grotesque in the flickering light of the television. The coats hung unevenly, bulging in strange places, looking less like fabric and more like mass. He tried to focus on the plot, but a smell began to distract him. It started faint, a whiff of wet soil and copper, but it was growing stronger. It smelled like the woods after a flood, musky and rotten. "Damn old house," Lucas muttered, grabbing a throw pillow and hugging it to his chest. He convinced himself it was a leak in the basement or the damp rising from the crawlspace. He refused to look at the corner again. Looking felt like inviting something to happen. To stop himself from checking, he did something that felt safe but was incredibly foolish. He shifted his position on the couch, turning his back to the corner to face the television squarely. He turned the volume up to 40, letting the wall of sound wrap around him like a shield. He was exhausted. The adrenaline dump from the earlier scare had left him drained, and the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass was hypnotic. His eyelids grew heavy. He told himself he was just resting his eyes during a dull dialogue scene. But as he drifted into a half-sleep, the sensory warning signs screamed at him. The smell of wet earth was not coming from the basement. It was sharp and pungent, as if a pile of mud had been dumped right behind the sofa. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, prickling with an electric charge that had nothing to do with the storm. He was ignoring the most primal instinct a human being possesses, the sensation of being hunted. The movie cut to a commercial break. The sudden transition from booming explosions to a mute, sleek car advertisement plunged the room into a jarring auditory void. The silence was sudden and absolute, save for the muffled rain. Lucas blinked his eyes open, groggy and disoriented. The room was dimmer now. The car commercial was dark and moody. And then he heard it. It was not the wind. It was not the house settling. It was a sound distinct from the natural chaos of the storm. Hooah! A wet, rattling intake of air. It was right there, directly behind his left ear. So close he could feel the warmth of the breath against his skin, carrying that sickening stench of unwashed body and rot. Lucas's blood turned to ice. His entire body locked up in a rigor of pure terror. The rational part of his brain tried to scream that it was the ventilation, but the animal part knew better. The animal part knew that the coat rack was not wood and wool. Slowly, agonizingly, Lucas turned his head. The corner where the rack had been was empty. His gaze tracked closer, right behind the sofa. Standing there, towering over him, was the shape. Up close, the illusion shattered. The coat was a patchwork of filthy, scavenged rags and garbage bags tied together with twine. The hat was a matted, greasy mess of hair plastered over a pale, gaunt forehead. The thing was not a piece of furniture. It was a man who was impossibly tall, his limbs long and skeletal. He had been standing in the corner on one leg, his other leg tucked up, his arms twisted at impossible angles to mimic the branches of a rack. He had held that pose for hours, without moving, without blinking, just watching. Now he was uncurling. A long, grime-covered arm lowered slowly, the joints cracking like dry twigs. The man looked down at Lucas with eyes that were wide, bloodshot, and completely devoid of humanity. He smiled, revealing yellow, filed teeth. "You moved?" the intruder rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. The scream died in Lucas's throat, choked off by the sheer proximity of the horror. The intruder reached out, his hand huge and claw-like, aiming for Lucas's neck. Survival instinct, sharp and violent, finally overrode the fear. Lucas did not think, he reacted. He gripped the heavy television remote in his hand and swung it backward with every ounce of strength he possessed. The plastic brick connected with the bridge of the intruder's nose with a sickening crunch. The man howled, a high-pitched, animalistic shriek that shattered the silence. He stumbled back, clutching his face, black blood spurting between his fingers. Lucas did not wait to see if the man fell. He launched himself off the couch, scrambling over the coffee table, his socks slipping on the hardwood floor. He heard the heavy thud of the man lunging forward, his hands swiping the air where Lucas's head had been a split second before. "Come back!" the intruder roared, the voice wet and gurgling. Lucas sprinted toward the kitchen, aiming for the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. He could hear the frantic, uneven footsteps of the man behind him. Slap, thud, slap, thud, closing the distance with terrifying speed. He reached the glass door. It was locked. The latch was jammed, old and rusted. Lucas fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking so violently he could not grip the metal. He could hear the breathing right behind him again. Hooah! He turned his head and saw the man in the doorway of the kitchen, blood streaming down his face, grinning that awful, toothy grin. The man lunged. Lucas screamed and threw his shoulder into the glass. It did not break. He grabbed one of the heavy oak dining chairs and swung it with a primal roar. Crash! The safety glass shattered into a million glittering diamonds. The storm rushed in, cold and violent. Lucas threw himself through the jagged hole, slicing his arms and legs, tumbling onto the wet concrete of the patio. He did not feel the pain. He scrambled up and ran into the rain, sprinting toward the neighbor's lights through the mud, not daring to look back, praying the man would not follow him into the open. The police found the man 2 hours later. He had not chased Lucas. He had gone back to the living room and resumed his position in the corner, freezing in place as the SWAT team entered, as if believing he could turn back into furniture if he just stayed still enough. They found his nest in the attic, a crawl space directly above Lucas's bedroom. There were food wrappers, bottles of urine, and a small peephole drilled through the floorboards looking down into the shower. The police estimated he had been living there for 3 weeks. He had been there when Lucas's parents were packing. He had been there when Lucas arrived. The coat rack Lucas's father had supposedly brought down? His father confirmed over the phone that they did not own a coat rack. They never had. Lucas moved into a modern apartment in the city a month later. It's on the 10th floor. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and open-plan rooms. But the most striking feature of his new home is what it lacks. There is no tall furniture, no floor lamps, no bookshelves, no wardrobes, because every time Lucas sees a shadow stretch across a wall or catches a silhouette in his peripheral vision, his heart stops. He knows now that safety is an illusion. He knows that monsters do not hide under the bed. They stand in the corner, draped in rags, holding their breath, just waiting for you to turn your back.